Thank you.
Hello, welcome. This Pathways to Peace Symposium, and we are talking about peace. We're talking about inner peace, interpersonal peace, and someday how we can get that into big peace. So we're trying to figure out some pathways to get there. We've had some fantastic presentations already, and some more coming. And here comes Dr. Bill Overton is going to speak to us about comprehensive SEL program. SEL is emotional intelligence, is EQ, is EI, it has a bunch of different names. It's wonderful stuff. And it's the key to peace, in our opinion. EQ for peace, right? That's the point. And we're finding that we can't really get to peace without knowing about how our emotions work. So Bill is going to take it away. Go ahead. As you start talking, I will show your intro slide. But
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. And again, happy birthday, Matt. I said it before. You're a good-looking 25-year-old.
Thank you.
I think that, first of all, listening to the end of Matt's presentation, I feel like I'm an all-star wrestler and you're doing tag team, so it's like, okay, tag, it's my turn now. And I'll tag you back and it'll be your turn,
Right.
Yeah, anything. I mean, all these things are so important for so many reasons. As I mentioned before, I was a classroom teacher for about 40 years and also principal for a while, charge of cultures and stuff like that. And one thing that I found, even though I was fortunate to start at a school that had their own SEL program, even though before it was called SEL, before Daniel Goleman wrote his book, I was lucky to get there and start my career there, and actually spend most of my time there. I also had a chance during those years to looking at what the screen's doing. I got a chance to help teachers and parents, kind of put their own spin on EQ or SEL at home and in their classrooms. And these things, if you do them together in a concerted way, you can change cultures of whatever, your family, your job, your classrooms, your schools, and so on. And so it's pretty remarkable stuff. So after my career for a while, for a long time, I kind of decided, like, okay, so what actually happened, when I was, a teacher, and what did I do with SEL and all these things? Because I know it was big in my classroom and it was big in the school and so on. And so I started thinking, and it actually turns out that it falls into like 3 categories. And these are things that I trained teachers with, trained parents with, and spoke to other groups as well about it. And so basically I call it a comprehensive SEL program, but basically it's 3 things that you can do in any order at any time. And I just think of them this way. And so maybe it'll help you. One thing that I did find is that teachers especially they really wanted an SEL program or EQ program, but they really didn't know how to get started. So I kind of wrote this up with the hopes that maybe it would help them and maybe parents as well to do something or to start. Yeah, before going into that, I believe that everyone here today desires peace, right? I mean, that's a given. But whatever your journey, it all starts with, as Matt said, with your inner self, the part of you that is actually trying to be emotionally intelligent. So basically, EQ leads to peace. So what I found upon reflection is that everything I did with emotional intelligence and culture and so on fell into 3 categories. I call them components: proactive, responsive, and embedded. This is my cute little pyramid that is a logo or whatever. So before we can actually get into that, we have to talk about and consider emotional safety. As you might have already heard, emotional safety is basically people willing to take interpersonal risks and be vulnerable. This also is kind of a litmus test of both families and of classrooms. If that kids are willing to share, make themselves vulnerable, then you have a culture that is really open to very positive things. If they won't share, then that means it's something that you probably need to work on. During that, in emotional safety, participants must be free to speak openly. You must give everyone equal opportunity and not just, okay, you get 30 seconds and you get 5 minutes. And don't allow, you have to be really consistent with this, is don't allow interruptions, name calling, put downs, or distractions of any kind. All these you have to be really consistent about. Make sure you thank the speaker, even if it's your son or daughter, after she shares. Thank you for sharing that. And on top of that, I call it punctuate or punctuation, is that after each person shares, you punctuate it with, oh, that's an excellent idea. I didn't know that before, or whatever. And what that does, it gives the speaker the message that you care about what he or she said, and that you feel like they have something important to contribute. And that's very validating and also encourages them to do more of the same. Don't allow anybody to make judgments about the content from a participant. The first one, the proactive component, these don't start in any order. You can do them at any point in time. I call this being intentional, because basically this is usually a planned scheduled time, and with a plan of what you're going to talk about, what activities you're going to do, and so on, with your student or your family. It can be role playing, it can be hands-on activities, it can be explicit lessons, it can be journal writing. I'm a big journal writing fan. It could be published curriculum, it could be so much more. But these are things that that the proactive can look like. Basically, it's for families, it's best introduced during quiet times, before bed or at the dinner table. It could also be introduced during long drives. All you have to do is pick a topic. And so maybe, while you're driving to Disneyland, you can, ask your kids, do you know what the word adversity means? Have you ever heard of that word? Does anybody know what it means? Or I'm going to make a guess, and so on. And then, eventually, after explaining whatever, you can say, are there any things that, you've had, any times you've had to overcome adversity? And so again, you start bringing it back into their lives. The next component is more intuitive, is called the responsive component. And basically, it is exactly what it says. You respond to things that are happening. I believe that everyone needs a predictable time when they can be assured of being heard. That doesn't mean necessarily a dialogue, it means being heard. And it's very validating for kids and everybody to know that they're being listened to and focused upon at that time. And it gives everyone a chance to discuss and process. It is somewhat intuitive, because you do have to read the room, so to speak. You have to realize that people are hurting, or that somebody has, a negative look on their face, or somebody's crying or something. So reading or predicting emotions of others is the first step. And I think also for teachers, they sometimes are hesitant about doing that because they might be wrong. It's okay to be wrong with this. It's okay to go to somebody that had, like this little guy down the lower left, and say, what's up? And find out that nothing's up, or that, that something that is easily solved or whatever. But it is that something you can check out, then, test your hypothesis. Classroom meetings are probably the best medium for discussing social emotional concepts for any component. Let me tell you a little story about one of the times that it was very powerful. So we used to do sharing, kind of like you're seeing on the screen, every once in a while, or every week, or every day. I can't remember. I was in a first and second grade classroom at the time. And this little girl came up to me and said, can I share last? And I said, sure. So we went around, and then we came to her. She stood up and blurted out in hysterics and tears and like that her parents were getting divorced. It obviously was a big thing to her, and it's a big thing to a lot of kids. Some trauma is there for sure. And I was a pretty new teacher at that time. I didn't know, as a first and second grade teacher, I didn't know, how to respond. I did know that I had a choice to do that or go to, a reading lesson, but this is always so much more important than that. And so I told her that I'm really sorry that, that you're feeling this way. This can't be easy for you. but I also said, I've never experienced this myself, so I don't know really how to help you. And I asked the class, does anybody here have any experiences or anything to say to, her name was Susan, that that might be helpful to her? And I was amazed at how many kids raised their hands and said very comforting things to her. Like, I went through that too. I felt like you did at one point in time, but, it went away, or I'm much better now. Or, one kid said, I like it now because I get 2 birthdays and 2 holiday presents or whatever. So it's really a good way for kids to let things out and to be helped by you or the people around them. There's another story about this guy named Josh, who was an extraordinary individual, very much on the spectrum. And we got very upset at any apparent injustices, let's say, in games or sports, in PE or recess. He would storm off, he'd yell and scream, he would do all kinds of things. And obviously, his classmates and the kids around him on the playground really didn't want any part of him, because he was always going to take the ball and run away. He was always going to ruin the game in some way, or make it, definitely a negative experience for everybody. What we did during that time, and actually my whole career, we did what I call debrief recesses and PE afterwards. So they'd come in, we'd sit down, and we would talk about, what happened. And people have this predictable opportunity to talk about the injustices for Josh and help him or them to understand, what the issue was and so on, and how to help out. And after a while, he became very calm on the playground and during PE, because he knew he was going to have his day in court. He knew that no matter what happened during that time, he was just going to let it go for then, and then come back in the classroom, and then with an adult facilitator, myself, let him talk about and talk with the rest of the class about some of the things that were troubling to him. So again, just the meetings and debriefing, letting people share, really helped a lot with his story. You don't have to meet with the whole class necessarily. You can meet with one person, 2 people, especially if it's an argument of some kind. And so the responsive component, it can be immediate, it can be spontaneous, it can be with classroom meetings, it can be small groups. It can be also, I've seen it where the class has been trained on how to facilitate some issues. And I've seen them, some of the peers, especially with older kids, participate with student facilitation of some of these responsive components. For families, these responsive component can be effective anytime. It can be at the end of an argument. It can be talking, debriefing the day at the dinner table. It can be something that is coming up, or something that people are upset about or afraid about. My daughter, while she was growing up, would sometimes fly into this huge rage, this huge fit. And basically I found, removing her from the room was the best thing to do in the short term. But I never let it drop there. And so after we had both cooled down, I would go into her room and talk with her privately. And those were some of the best talks, because we were both calm. We were both able to explain, what we were thinking, what was going on, what the background of that decision was, or whatever. And it was really worth the time to discuss these things with my kids. The dinner table is a great time to talk about problems that have come up, or even make them up. They can be hypothetical. What would you do if you were, you're a person and you come across this, or something like that. The embedded component has 2 parts. And this is where part 1 is where adults put themselves into their students' minds. So they try and think, okay, what might this child be thinking right now while playing with other friends? What might he or she be thinking before going to school for the first day? And anything that might be anxiety producing, you can then bring out in the open and talk about it freely. Again, you can make a guess. You don't have to be right, and you can be, but it's all helpful no matter what. One thing that teachers take for granted, I think, is that starting in the beginning of the school year, small group instruction can be anxiety producing. They're thinking, for example, am I going to be the only boy there? Am I going to be the only girl there? Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to look smart? And so basically talking about this ahead of time is part of the embedded component. We would have a meeting, we talk about, well, okay, I'm going to start small group instruction tomorrow. What are you thinking about that? And then give some prompts if you need it. I would wonder about this. And so you can, again, I call them elephants in the room, out into the open and reassure everybody. I think of this one too. My high school actually didn't have a prom. I'm not sure why. Got to check that out sometime. But this is an exciting moment. Field trips are exciting, but the thing about it is that they also come with certain levels of anxiety. If you think about certain times like this or weddings, whatever, people aren't necessarily free from anxiety just because it's a cool event or something special is going to happen. It's worth thinking about in their minds what might be some of the stress producers. And is there alcohol going to be there? Who's going to drive? Am I going to know the driver? Who's what's going to happen there? Am I going to be put in uncomfortable positions? And you can talk about those and give some advance notice or training on what you might say in certain situations or whatever. This is where then the second part of the embedded component is where the emotional intelligent concepts are integrated into the regular curriculum. Literature is the best way of doing this. No matter what you're reading, there's always going to be characters. There's always going to be some kind of plot or problem to solve, whatever. And those are great opportunities or great fodder for discussion with your kids or your family about lessons that you could learn from Little Red Riding Hood, or what kind of person was she? Did she make the right decision? So you can talk about all these things through the characters and through the plot, even with adversarial characters. And so, you can think about, ask the question, is there a way to do this story where everybody might win? Or what would you do differently to improve the situation? What would you do if you were in that situation? And these are all good questions and would be considered part of the embedded component. History is an excellent one too, to talk about things, comparing yourself and contrasting to, major players from history. What qualities did they have? And do you have any of those qualities? Or do you want any of those qualities? You could do some, what if this happened, or what if this didn't happen? And what would you do? And these are, again, good ways to embed or integrate curriculum or EQ into curriculum. For families, it's the same kind of thing. And again, best before, during meals or before bed or whatever, and making links between, books that you're reading or events from the day to EQ concepts. So if your child is telling you about something, a conflict that he or she had with another child, tell me about that. Now, what kind of things were going on there? Were you being angry? Did you think before acting? Did you consider other possibilities? And these are all emotional intelligent concepts, navigating the emotional or the social milieu. The good thing about it when it's out of context is that kids can see that EQ concepts are everywhere. They can be they can be applied to their own lives. Even Little Red Riding Hood's life or adventures can be applied in different ways to their own lives. I believe that all of the components, all three, the proactive, the responsive, and the embedded, should have opportunities for reflection, verbal or written. I'm a big fan of people talking or writing in journals. I think they're great logs for looking back and as well as looking forward. Opportunities for debriefing experience with others, like I mentioned, and where appropriate, creating new plans and for future experiences that are similar. To get started, it seems very simple to me, and I do believe it's fairly simple, but the first thing is just schedule some time. You can decide in your mind that tonight at dinner, you're going to talk about something with EQ. Or you can say, okay, we're driving a long trip tomorrow. I'm going to do something with EQ. Tonight at bed, I'm going to do something with EQ. And it can start with just even what's called increasing emotional literacy, which are vocabularies. most kids will start with mad, sad, glad. A lot of adults do the same thing. And so expanding that repertoire, so there are more things that to choose from, and that there are more subtleties between emotions. And so you say, okay, so I'm going to introduce the word perseverance. And so at the table, you can say, does anybody know what that means? And you can see what they think or not. You don't. The great thing about this, you don't have to know the answers. You know, you can let them come up with the answers, or you can go to, in this case, a dictionary or whatever. So you don't have to be the expert. You just have to schedule some time and open with a question. After reading aloud to children, as I mentioned before, you know, evaluating the characters, which is great higher level thinking as well for kids. And like I said, pick an EQ word or not. So the final thoughts that I believe children and adults do really well when there are predictable opportunities to be heard and seen. Like Josh, he's going to have his day in court after recess. He just has to make it back to the meeting area after recess. Also before changes in schedule or routine. You know, we're going to do this tomorrow, and let's talk about it beforehand, and make sure everybody gets opportunities to share and contribute. One thing for sure, and this is more what Matt was saying, that social emotional concepts are part of everything. They can be connected to all parts of our lives. We just have to look for it. And the more we integrate it into people's, including kids, regular lives, the more meaningful it is for them, and more they can apply those lessons to their own lives. I have other thoughts about project-based learning that I actually wrote in a book. If you're interested, on Amazon, it's this one. And I'd love to, you know, correspond with you either at the email address or the wholechildeducationalservices.com, which is my web address. Thank you for paying attention. If anybody has any questions, go for it. If not, we'll let you go to the next.
Dr. Downing, what's your emergency?
I'm sorry? Was there a question?
He was on the phone. He was asking somebody else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Person on the
He
phone
said,
might have a
"What's your-"
question.
Yeah, right.
Anyway.
Yeah, he said, "What's your emergency?" So interesting.
Okay.
Anyway, great stuff, Bill. Nice. And I like how you were able to take it from the classroom into the family, into into parenting. So that's beautiful. And I like that predictable opportunities to be seen and heard. That is very cool in itself, if you think about it. And that's what us humans, us adult humans, would like that also, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we meet on Zoom, Matt.
Yeah, right.
Every
Predictable
Tuesday.
opportunities. Yeah,
Right,
it's a
right.
Zoom presentation. Yep. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so you've got just a couple more minutes left. So how do we get this out to the world? How do we take this and run with it? You know what I mean? I know we've been working on this for a while, but what do you think?
You know, I'm kind of a fan of letting things happen naturally, kind of in a grassroots thing. So I think the more that you get the word out and people start practicing these things and find out that it's not so hard. You know, basically it's a little bit risky, you know, especially when kids or adults take you to places that you've never been, like the little girl that's blurted out, you know, my parents are getting divorced, you know, not knowing how to respond to that. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I'm fallible too, but it's but basically you go through it and you find out actually on the other side of that event how great it was for that little girl, how great it was for her to share in front of the class. And again, I think I said this, but you know, if you want to know, if you take a litmus test of whether the people you're with, your family or classroom, whatever, are really comfortable and safe, you can see what the responses are. If they don't respond or they don't, you know, say anything about their own emotions, then I think you need to work, you know, a little bit more on emotional safety. And you can do that by doing kind of more of the same, but on lighter topics and lighter schedules, or more things closer to home, like, you know, what are you going to do after lunch kind of thing, just to get people talking. But the more we do this, the more we open up people, as you mentioned in your presentation, Matt, you know, the more we take responsibility for our own emotions and identify those emotions, that's the best. And so I think we start that way, and we keep, do things like this and whatever else, and try and expand this, by grassroots efforts. And then, of course, taking any opportunities to do skywriting, up in the air or something like that, any other way, articles or other things that are out there. There's lots of really great programs, but I think the more generic way, I think that kids come into the classroom with, 30 pieces of curriculum for social emotional learning. In fact, everybody that we run into has their own curriculum. I bet you if we ask everybody on the screen right now, everybody could come up with, boy, I really would like some debriefing about this, or some advice on this, or just let somebody know about this, or share this, or whatever. So I think that that the curriculum is there in front of us if we're sensitive and observant, and kids have a safe environment. That's
right on.
A verbose answer for you.
No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. And I've told you many times, one of the concepts that you've brought up that I love is, rather than get out your book, get out your SEL book, you say, so how was recess? How was lunch?
Right.
The most emotional parts of their day. So that is just beautiful to me.
Well, that's kind of kids' reality, right? Why do they go to school?
Yeah.
It's not for my math lesson.
Yeah,
I'd
right.
love to say,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. As I also mentioned, later on, we have another teacher, Ancha, who is going to talk about a similar subject about how she gets the kids there. She doesn't have curriculum, get the kids, ask them
Right.
what you guys talk, what do you care about?
Right.
And you can take anything, any game, anything, and make it into a learning experience.
Everything.
Emotionally. It's very cool.
Everything that we do that's human, has an
Yep.
emotional aspect. The
Yep.
one thing about
Thought-
package SEL programs is that there is a place for it in the 3 components, in the proactive, if you need to or want to. I prefer basically more of just kind of watching and listening, and kind of who comes in the classroom, after recess, and why, and so, and asking why. Anyway, that's more my kind of agenda, so to speak.
Yep.
All right.
Beautifully done. Your book is fantastic. I think I'm committed to helping you continue to get this out to people everywhere, so we can help teachers and parents, trickle down, as we say, right?
All right.
So thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you, Matt.
All
Thanks
right.
for letting me
Appreciate
speak today. All right. Happy
All right.
birthday again.
Thank you. This is cool because I took a screenshot just now, because these are like some of my favorite people on the planet are in the same room at the same time. This is pretty cool, you guys. So, all right, I'm going to stop.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Bye-bye.